Cool. Welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your evenings to join us. My name's Lizzie. I work for the Organic Growers Alliance. I'm going to do a quick spiel and then hand over to our brilliant panelists to talk about what you've all come to hear about. But first of all, if you don't know, I assume most of you are members, but just in case not, you should join up to the Organic Growers Alliance. We are the voice of organic horticulture in the UK. We're a members-based organisation who support growers, organic in transition conversion and practicing organic growers across the UK by providing information, practical advice, relevant, up-to-date information and skill sharing via webinars, our Organic Grower magazine, our fortnightly podcast, on-farm events, and kind of more peer-to-peer support. So you can sign up, you get 4 magazines a year, discounted rates to all of our events, and you get to be a brilliant part of the crew. So yeah, really happy to be joined by Ash and Adam tonight. I'll let them introduce themselves properly. But the format of this is just they're going to be talking for about an hour, as usual, and then about half an hour for questions. Please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. So there's a chat box where you can just talk about, introduce yourselves, where you're from, and maybe talk about the whatever, just chat away on there. Questions, however, just so that Ash and Adam can see them, please put them in the Q&A box. I will try and keep track of the chat box to see if there are any questions and just forward them over to the Q&A box, but it just means that they can see them all when it comes to questions, and it just doesn't disrupt the flow of what they're talking about. I think if there are any urgent questions, maybe one of you, Adam or Ash, could just see if there's something that somebody won't understand it unless you answer it at that point, then maybe just quickly jump in, but there shouldn't be. Otherwise, just wait till the end. That's it from me. I will be on hand for any emergency tech support, which I doubt there will be any. But yeah, over to you, Adam and Ash. Thank you very much.
Cool, just trying to get the presentation up and running. Internet's being slow. Come on. Okay, I'll make a start while that's loading. Cool, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. It's on the question of sort of scaling up the market garden. Me and Ash are both going to give a brief introduction of our farms, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail about our own journeys, sort of moving beyond our initial production area. And that's not really playing along. Okay. Okay, so to scale up or not to scale up, that's the question. My name is Adam Beer. I run the Pitney Farm Market Garden with my partner Rita. It's based in South Somerset, about an hour south of Bristol. And we're tenant farmers renting 4.5 acres of certified organic land. And we produce wholesale veg all year round. We're situated on a 100-acre mixed organic farm, and our landlords run a farm shop on site who are our primary customers. Cool. These 3 photos are a series of satellite pictures that give an idea of how our production has changed over the years and the sort of corresponding change in our acreage and our turnover. The left-hand pictures from 2015, from before me and Rita arrived. The middle photos from 2020, with the production sort of area on the right there. And that was the first year we were here, and we were just growing in that sort of one field there. And then the right-hand photo is zoomed out a bit further. That's to include the new field that we took on in 2021. So we were producing in the top right-hand side of that field. When we first came to the farm in 2020, we just rented the one field that had previously been in production since 2013. And as you can see, sort of over the years, the production systems have expanded, but become also more standardized over time. The month that we moved to the farm, COVID hit. So that was a shocker. And so that year we had kind of a large demand, which we struggled to meet during the winter months, especially. The main limitation to increasing our year-round production to meet that demand was that our current rotations couldn't fit any more brassicas in, which is a really important family for sort of January to April production. So in our second year, we took on another 3/4 of an acre in the adjacent field, which you can see in the right-hand photo there. And that was purely to grow brassicas initially. The year after, we were pushed into renting another 3/4 of an acre by our landlord, so to rent half that whole field. And at that point, we decided to grow a wider range of crops, again, predominantly for the sort of late autumn to early spring window. And so since 2022, we've been producing on the same acreage, and our rent for that is for the 4.5 acres, and the infrastructure is £6,000 a year. Our journey into scaling up was aided by the fact that the original market garden was already a tillage-based system. So they had a contractor to come in. Sorry, I moved on too quickly there. It's been a bit slow. The contractor came in and ploughed and power harrowed the whole area at the beginning of the year to prepare the ground. And the bed format, which we've been using the whole time, was standardized. So the beds are 1.5 meter centers. It's a 1.2 meter bed top that we're sort of working on, and then 30 centimeter paths. And this is a bed size which lends itself well to tractor-based production. Outside, we've got 3 rotations. The market garden area with 25-meter long beds, high density plantings, multi-cropping, and mostly hand planted and weeded. Then we've got the 50-meter rotation, which is more mechanized, where we mostly produce spuds, leeks, and kales. And then we've got the 100-meter rotation, which is in that new field, which is almost entirely mechanized production for that winter sort of crop period. On reflection, we probably approached scaling up by scaling down tools and techniques used by larger field scale producers, rather than sort of scaling up the market gardening techniques. We have a focus on labour saving equipment, which enables us to grow more veg without a corresponding increase in labour. We've had a lot of support in this journey, as we found that sort of local, larger scale growers have been more than happy to share their experience, knowledge, and sometimes they've lent us kit, they've sold old kit. So if you're thinking about embarking on this journey, I would really recommend trying to create links with anyone growing field scale veg near you, so there will be a source of information and help. And now I'm going to pass over to Ash just for his little introduction.
Cool. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Ash, and I run Trill Farm Market Garden, which is, hopefully you can see on the screen at the moment. We're in East Devon. We're kind of on the border of East Devon, West Dorset, and South Somerset, really. We rent 5 acres on a 300-acre organic farm, and we've been here since well, it's just coming up to 15 years that we've been here. I was just going to give a very brief kind of introduction to the farm, and just like how we came here, basically, and my background, because that's kind of feels sort of relevant to it all. Can you just pop it on one, Addy? So I grew up on council small holding in West Sussex. This is a photo I found when I went to see my parents recently, of the council. So it was about 4 acres, that they took on in 1987. Yeah, so this is actually a picture of the 1987 hurricane that happened like a few months, well, I think about 6 months after they moved there. All of their glass houses got totally trashed. But I'm the little one just on the edge of the photo there. So this was kind of like I suppose somehow this inspired me to do what to go on to do what we do now. And so yeah, basically went on to study horticulture at Reading University, where actually I learned very little about vegetable growing. I sort of went off into historical garden restoration for a few years, and then came back to veg growing. Yeah, kind of like definitely had a sort of calling to to grow veg again. It felt like the right thing to do. So, and an opportunity came up. We kind of started putting feelers out, and an opportunity came up here at Trill. So we moved down to take on what was then, yeah, just 2.5 acres, and it had been already kind of set up as a market garden with some of the infrastructure here, and yeah, so big twin span and fencing and things like that, and yeah, that's kind of I think that's relevant. I'll come to that more later, but that's kind of relevant about how we kind of started off here and why we decided to do it the way we're doing it. But yeah, it was only until 3 years ago that we took on another 2.5 acres. I think, is there one more slide actually of this one as well? Can't actually remember what it is. Oh yeah, that was basically just what was that? That was our second year here. So we had the big twin span in the kind of background, and then we have gradually expanded, putting lots more tunnels over the years. Yeah, again, I'll talk more about that later. I think Addy's going to go into detail with his scaling up, and then it'll come back to me later on.
Okay, so thanks, Ash. This is an idea of what we're going to be covering today. I'll be talking for about half an hour, and then we'll hand over to Ash, and then there'll be some time for some questions at the end. The topics I'm going to talk about or cover are sort of market and your business model, access to land, crop selection, kit and machinery, ground prep and cultivations, weeding, fertility management, the economics of scaling up, and soil health. And to some of these topics, I'm going to give a brief overview before giving a sort of case study from our own farm. There's a lot to cover, so I'm probably going to move quite quickly. So hopefully you can keep up. So your market and business model, obviously, before you're scaling up, you want to have a reasonable idea of your route to market, and that'll impact your sort of volumes you need to be producing, and then also what it's likely to mean for your sort of business's finances. The business models broadly are sort of wholesale, which can vary a lot in what it looks like depending on your scale. The benefits to it is less time in selling and admin and more time growing and selling. But you do get a lower percentage of the retail price. Then you can sort of sell direct. That's for your own shop, through market stalls, or having a box scheme, where there's a lot more time in sales related activity. And there can be a limit to local demand depending on where you are. So therefore you might need to increase your own sort of delivery route. The major benefit of this is you can capture the full value of the produce. A mixed wholesale and retail approach is good because it's very dynamic, and it means you can focus your wholesale production on crops that you have a good market for, that you know that you can grow efficiently and effectively. The scale of production that you're on will have a big impact on what your sort of outlets look like. If you're aware that your current customers could take more volume or would want produce for a longer period, you can keep your sort of your area quite local. And the benefit of this is that short supply chains mean you've got a closer and better customer relation. and you'll get a higher percentage of the retail price as there'll be less middlemen. And then as you're sort of moving towards more regional or national supply, then the larger and the further your supply chain, the higher the requirements for quality, continuity of supply, and the lower the price per unit you'll get. So some quite major disadvantages, but you can shift high volumes, produce on that economy with those economies of scale, which can then really bring down the cost of production for sort of producing and harvesting crops. At Pitney, we're a year-round wholesale operation, and we focused on local short supply chains. Our main customer is the on-site farm shop, and our other customers are mostly within a 10-mile radius and consist of restaurants, cafes, market stalls, CSA, and other box schemes. Production for us is mostly driven by what the shop wants. The manager of the shop wants the largest variety for the longest period of time, and that means we produce over 50 types of crop and well over 200 varieties. And unusually for our scale, we produce a lot of the lower value crops like carrots and onions and potatoes. The value of the sales that go to the shop has been pretty steady for the last 5 years. When we started out, the sales to the shop was about 35 grand, which accounted for 2/3 of our income. But now, because of expanding our production, the shop takes about 1/3 by value, and our offsite customers make up the other 2/3. Access to land. Sort of before you're scaling up, you'll have to consider whether there's suitable land that's within a reasonable distance of your current site. This will probably have the largest impact on what your scaling up looks like. We were very lucky to have, with the proximity of the land we could rent, but as the photo on the right shows, the suitability for production was definitely more questionable. The major considerations will be like soil type and quality and topography of the land. If it's heavy ground, it won't be suitable for early production or mechanized harvesting in winter. If it's light or sandy sort of ground, you'll have to consider irrigation supply. And proximity, if you're on 2 sites, you really have to consider how long the drive is between. Can you move a tractor between both sites? Where you're going to store your machinery? Might you need extra farm vehicles for transporting staff and tools and harvesting? And all of this will add extra cost and complexity to the system. So at Pitney, we were lucky, like I said, that we had the land available to us, which is probably one of the main reasons that led us into scaling up. There's a number of sort of square, flat, south-facing fields surrounding our primary production site, which are all already certified organic. And the ground is all free draining. It's a free draining, grade-free, shallow clay loam soil, which is it's kind of got a good innate fertility, but it does have a very high fraction of stones, as you saw before. And the fact that it's free draining means you can get out on the land relatively early for a clay loam, but it does have a tendency to dry out badly in the summer. And so combined, these factors make the sort of broader farm kind of marginal for producing field scale veg. And linked with that is that the farm has some irrigation infrastructure, but it's very limited. So that's sort of stopped us from considering expanding production further or rotating the veg across more of the farm, as we felt trying to grow on unirrigated ground in our context just wouldn't be worth it. The risks would be too high. So crop selection. So this would be the outcome of many factors that we'll talk about. What crops you grow and on what scale will depend on your market, your soil type, your infrastructure, especially storage and cold storage, and the equipment that's available to you. For our field scale area, we sort of focus on crops that lent themselves to being produced in a mechanized way. They had wider spacings, they had a longer time in the ground. They're sort of easy plants for mechanical planting, and they're plants with higher tolerance to weed pressure or easier to weed. So for example, we grow a lot of leeks in that area, but not onions. Due to our soil, we don't do a large amount of direct dip drilled crops, especially not in the top field, as like drilling and establishment is problematic, as is sort of harvesting in winter, and especially wouldn't be able to sort of machine harvest, as it's not appropriate for our soil. We currently don't have we haven't got any proper chiller space, which can be a great tool for longer term root storage. But again, we didn't go down that route because of the lack of infrastructure, really. So in terms of kit and machinery, there's a very wide range of machinery out there, from very specialized, expensive field scale equipment to lots of rusty bits of metal that you can find in a hedge, which can be very useful. At the farm, we bought a tractor towards the end of our first year, as we were renting tractors from our landlord, but they weren't really fit for purpose, and they ended up costing us quite a lot to rent. So we were fortunate enough to buy a Kubota M6040 from someone who'd literally recently retired as a market gardener. So it was a cracking tractor and really very much fit for purpose. That table on the left there shows the machinery we've accumulated over the last few years. And that would basically be all you need to grow on 10 or so acres. Like we're kind of over kitted for our scale, but that means we've got the capacity to grow if we'd want to. Between about 2015 and 2020, the site was contract ploughed, like I said, and then either power harrowed by a contractor, or we would rent the farm's tractor with a power harrow as well. And the only machinery that we had was the rented tractor, spring tines, and a flail mower. And that's probably the least amount of machinery you can get away with, sort of, to start producing on more than a hand scale. So that's, not much to get your hands on, really, to make a start. But then in 2021, we got all the basic kit for mechanized field scale production. Really, they've got the tractor, a plough, a transplanter, a steerage hoe, and a rotavator. And then since 2021, we've sort of acquired quite a lot more kit, but it's mainly with the objective of doing a better job with less soil damage. So the machinery for scaling up, at least initially, it doesn't need to cost a fortune. All of the tractor mounted machinery, other than the Trefler harrow, has come to about £7,000. But I would recommend forking out and investing in a decent, well-maintained tractor, one that's safe to use and will work when you come to need to use it. And this will save you time, money, and stress in the long run. So ground prep and cultivations, like most commonly, the process that is most simple is to plough, which is to bury the weeds, crop residues, incorporate green manures or like manure or compost, and then to create a tilth. And this is usually done with a power harrow or a rotavator, which job is to break up the sort of larger clods produced by the ploughing and to help level out and consolidate the ground. And the reason you want to create a good tilth is this helps create a good condition for putting in plants and seeds. And then a good tilth also helps with sort of subsequent weeding operations. At Pitney, we're trying to reduce our inversion tillage. So we've sort of two routes of mechanized ground prep. If the ground has had persistent plants or weeds in it that cannot be terminated without inversion tillage, we'll plough. We're ploughing about one in every four blocks in the rotation and aiming to go no deeper than 6 inches. But preferably, instead of ploughing, we'll go through the Bomford's pigtail tine cultivator. And essentially this is just to loosen the soil so that the power harrow can get in and work effectively. And again, no more than 6 inches. And then after ploughing or tining, we use a power harrow. You often need to do more than one pass, at least with our ground, to get a sort of desired tilth, with a sort of week or so in between and a bit of weathering. And once we've got the tilth that we want, we'll roll with the beds with a 1.2 meter flat roller. And this marks out the beds ready for planting, as well as leveling and consolidating the bed after cultivating, and then you're ready to plant. So in this slide, I've got a video, but given how slowly my internet seems to be doing, it might not work. But essentially, it's a video of our transplanter in action. But I'll just start talking, and it might happen. Whilst we know other growers who are on larger acreages that do not use transplanters, our Chechi Magli module transplanter is central to our mechanized production. We grow as many crops as possible on 3 rows to a bed, which are 46 centimeters apart, which is a squeeze for the machine. But if the crop needs a wider spacing, we can grow it on 2 rows for like Brussels sprouts, or 1 row for squash. By having this versatility, we can keep planting densities as high as possible, which allows more roots in the soil, better ground cover, and in turn this helps reduce soil erosion and weed pressure. There's 2 major benefits to machine planting as I see it. It plants the modules very effectively. The 2 press wheels you can see there on the back very evenly consolidate the soil around the plant, which means they desiccate less quickly than hand planted modules. And then the other benefit is it plants very accurately. The distance between the rows is always totally even, which allows for a much higher accuracy of mechanized weeding. And when the machine is running well, it can be a lot faster than hand planting. But if the conditions or the plants are not so ideal, then there can be sort of a lot of stressful downtime whilst 3 people are waiting around watching me sweat and sort of swear a bit, trying to get it back up and running. Cool. Try and stop that. Cool, weeding. The first thing to say is that generally there's a higher tolerance to weeds in larger scale mechanized production. This is because if you're cultivating, it's easier to recover weedy ground. You can top it and then plow it, and essentially that gives you a clean slate to start from. With all weeding, the most important aspect is the size of the weeds. Ideally, they should always be managed at sort of a cotyledon size stage, so or before. So when there's just two leaves or before. And then the timeliness of this becomes even more important when scaling up, as it's possible to hand weed sort of larger weeds over a small area, but it's impossible to do that economically over a large area. And so there's, again, I've got a video in this next one, but it might not work. So there's two types of weeds. There's inter-row weeds, the weeds that between the rows of veg, which are relatively easy to manage with simple and cheap tools like a Massey Ferguson steerage hoe, like you see on the right there. Or you can manage quite big areas with just wheel hoes, like Terratech wheel hoes, I would say were pretty much worth the money. The more challenging weeds to manage efficiently are the intra-row weeds, and these are the weeds within the row. And for this, you need to use either ridging tools, which can move soil, to do this mechanically, that is. You need to use ridging tools which move soil into the row, covering the small weeds with soil, or finger weeders, which are rubber fingers that can go around the plants and flick the soil out from the row, and this dislodges small weeds. Another approach is to use a comb harrow, and this has thin tines that cover the whole bed, which act much like a rake and dislodge and cover weeds with soil when they're very small. So this works from chitting seeds to cotyledon stage weeds, but it doesn't work on bigger weeds at all. So the benefit of this, it can be used on beds with any row configuration. So the video here will show it. Last year we bought a Trefler harrow, which is a fancy adjustable comb harrow, and in each tine is individually sprung, meaning it has totally even pressure across the bed, and so it can get weeds in and between rows when they're small. And we can use this on pretty much every crop and as early as 7 days after planting. Another couple things to consider are stale seed beds. Try to get to the next slide. Which are an effective tool for field scale production. What you do is you prepare your beds 1 to 2 weeks before planting. Ideally, it's then irrigated or rained on to encourage the weed seed germination. And then you come and cultivate very shallowly, no more than a couple centimeters, to avoid bringing up new weed seeds. And the Trefler's great for doing that job. And this kills the first flush of weeds, which then gives the crop that once planted a kind of week or two head start in front of the weeds, which can be very handy. Another consideration is sort of perennial weeds, and these need to be properly managed when growing on a larger area, as you can't really go about hand digging, at least it's not an economically viable thing to do particularly. But if you don't deal with your perennial weeds, they can be very competitive if established in your cropping area, and a total nightmare if you're trying to deal with them whilst you've already got your crops in the ground. Effective tools for this and for managing them can be long-term deep-rooting green manures that are regularly topped. Ploughing can help with some, and bastard fallows using sort of springtime cultivators, which actively drag the roots out of the ground and exhaust the plant reserves. Here, after the onions, you can see they get quite weedy. So we do a bastard fallow, so it's like a 4 to 6 week bastard fallow with tines. And then in early to mid-September, we sow a very vigorous, diverse green manure mix with a high seeding rate. And this sort of, the bastard fallow knocks the perennials back, and then the highly competitive green manure sort of stops them growing in the autumn. And this can substantially lower the weed burden before the next crop, which after our alliums is carrots. So it's quite important one to have a low weed burden. So fertility building, when you're working over a larger area, you have to sort of approach fertility differently, as you can't really go about wheelbarrowing compost over 5 or 6 acres. Long-term green manures are great if you've got the space. They can be even better if they're grazed by livestock, and you sort of have a manure aspect to it as well. And these can provide most or all of the fertility for your crops. And it's a relatively cheap approach if you've got the means of establishing and managing the green manures. Compost, municipal wastes is fairly readily available, but it's got some major drawbacks. It's got low biological activity, and it's got potentially pretty high plastic and pollutant contamination in it. And that's why we've never used it on this farm. The benefit of it is it's fairly easy to handle. It can be spread with a front bucket, a link box, or a trailer if you haven't got access to a muck spreader. But definitely a better option is homemade compost, but it can be hard to generate sufficient quantities for field scale application. But obviously this can be done if you sort of with planning and investment in the kit and infrastructure to store it, turn it and apply it. Farmyard manure is biologically very rich, but it can be limited in its availability because most organic farmers will be using it within their own system. And unless it's very well rotted, it can be quite hard to handle and usually would require a muck spreader to apply. And then there's a lot of different options in terms of pelleted and granular fertilizers. And these, you can get different products based on your requirements, and they can be easy to handle and apply, but potentially a bit more expensive. At Pitney, we're really lucky to be situated on a broader organic mixed farm with livestock. So we've had access to ample farmyard manure, and the farmer muck spreads for us. We haven't got to have our own muck spreader. Historically, the muck's been over applied, at least down in that bottom field. So we're scaling back applications of that, and we're seeing positive results, especially on sort of aphids. Across quite a few of our sort of green leafy crops. Across most of our site, we use short-term but highly diverse green manure mixes, as we haven't got enough space in the rotation for long-term lays. And then in that top field, in the 100-meter rotation, we rotate with the farmer. So that one field split into 2 blocks, 2 years down to vegetable production, and then 2 years down to grass and clover, which the farmer cuts for silage and grazes. We also make a few tons of homemade compost a year, and historically this all went into the tunnels. But again, we're scaling back our application of compost in the protected cropping. So for the first time, we'll have some sort of quality homemade compost to start applying to the field. But we're kind of going to come up against how to effectively apply that at scale. And then the economics of scaling up. For most farms, especially small scale enterprises, labour will be your biggest single greatest expense. When mechanizing, the idea is you're investing in machinery to try and reduce your labour costs per acre. The benefits over labour is the machinery is an investment and an asset you can depreciate, and it also has a resale value. And then the idea of scaling up is you're hoping to generate more turnover, which then hopefully will, and what's likely to happen is your income profit margin might decrease, but because your overall turnover is increased, you should be able to take more home as the sort of farmer or business owner. And you need to sort of mechanize to a degree to economically produce lower value crops. Potatoes are a great example. They can be terribly uneconomical to grow by hand, but with very little investment, they can then become quite quick to harvest and then therefore quite well grow and harvest, therefore quite profitable crop. So over the last 4 years here, our turnover has doubled and our profit margin has dropped from 60% to 40%. But last year our profit was 40 grand, which meant that me and Rita could both work part-time, 3.5 days each a week, as we've got a 2-year-old now. And we managed to pay ourselves minimum wage and had money left to reinvest into the business. The largest change in the outgoings is staffing, but now we've got a year-round member of staff and 3 seasonal employees, which means we've hopefully created more meaningful sort of rural employment, and there's greater resilience in the business for illness and holidays and whatnot. And from this little table here, it's a bit jumbly because life's not so straightforward, but one thing we feel like we can pull out of it is that if you take on more land, your production and therefore your turnover is likely to increase. Each time we took on another 3/4 of an acre, our turnover increased by 15 grand. And there's 2 factors to this. There's an increase in production due to the new area in cultivation, but also it's helped, I think, probably quite a lot by freeing up space in the market garden where you were previously growing low value crops inefficiently to then having more space to grow higher value crops in a way that's more suited to that space. And then some graphs. So we thought that scaling up would help us increase our year-round production and that this would even out our income across the year, so sort of smooth that curve out. But clearly we haven't done that much, which was a surprise to me really. So these graphs at the top are percentage income for each month in 2020 and 2024. And then the bottom graphs are the total income by value per month. And it shows that whilst we have increased our production through the winter and hungry gap, we have at the same time increased our output through the summer season by a similar amount. That means the percentage income for each month has stayed fairly similar, but the values have increased, like I say, by almost double in some cases. And the benefit of this is now that we have a reasonable income through the whole of the winter and hungry gap, making about 20% of our income from March to May, which means we don't have that sticky point at the beginning of the year where there's a cash flow issue when you've got a lot of outgoings but not so much income. And then last but not least, soil health. There's never been a more important time to sort of ensure soil health is a key factor when designing your production systems. And as you scale up and increase your level of mechanization, your sort of ability to do harm and damage is greatly amplified. So maintaining and improving soil can become more difficult, which means you need to sort of consider it very carefully. And there can be external, like, you know, like that track on the right there. That's because we haven't got good tracks on our farm because we haven't made the investment or done the proper planning. So there is definitely an erosion issue there, which makes me a little bit miserable, to be honest, at times. So here on this next slide, there's sort of listing some principles that we use to help design our production systems. As I've said, we've sort of reduced inversion tillage, which is trying to reduce the amount of soil disturbance. We've reduced the time that the soil is bare by shortening the time between primary cultivations and planting, and that's shorter than with the pigtail tining than with the plough. And also by buying a lot of our own machinery, we've been able to reduce the time at which the soil's bare. Because if you're relying on contractors, they'll come when they want to, rather than when's best for you. So yeah, that can lead to some sort of soil issues, definitely. And then we've collected a lot of bed width size machinery, and this allows us to manage individual beds rather than whole blocks. And it means the compaction is localized. We undersow all the crops, especially going around in August and September, hoeing and undersowing everything. That was inspired by Ash and Jane Arnold. And I really feel like this is an essential practice nowadays. It's not a nice add-on. You need to have the ground covered. Like this last 24, 48 hours is a prime example of that. We've had sort of two centimeters of rain a day, and that's more than our soil can manage. So by having it covered, that helps to reduce erosion. We've got a diverse cropping system, as I've sort of explained already, but then we've also diverse undersowing mixes and cover crops of up to 15 species, and sort of always getting more complicated, it seems. We're introducing grazing sheep into more of the area to graze off green manures and crop debris before sort of the spring cultivation. And like I said again already, keeping planting densities as high as possible, which is why we tried to go 3 rows to a bed rather than 2, which is often an approach for a lot of mechanized farming systems on that sort of size bed. And then also we've started last year soaking modules in Johnson Sioux compost extract that we've made, and this is to try and restore some of the biological activity after cultivating. And that is a rundown of what we do growing veg. And then there's some resources there, but maybe we'll come back to those when we're doing the talk. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Ash is going to share his.
Okay. Thanks, Addy. That was amazing. You did very well to keep within the 30-minute time frame. See if I can do the same. I don't have much faith in myself for that, but let's see. So yeah, I think I'm going to give a bit, probably slightly less of a technical rundown of than Addy's given, but still hopefully helpful nonetheless. And my intention is to talk about why we scaled up and how, and then look at our particular context and how that's affected the scaling up, basically. And then going into a bit of detail on the economics of it for us, compared to when we were just within the market garden before scaling up. And then lastly, I wanted to talk a bit about how the importance of like personal preference and ideals, business ideals and values, how that should basically play a big part in making these decisions on whether you want to scale up or not. So stay on that. So why scale up? Which, yeah, is like kind of might seem the obvious answer is basically if you have a market for more produce, and you've got capacity to take on more land, and headspace to do that, and the appropriate knowledge and equipment and infrastructure, or finances, to do that, then I guess most people would probably say, yeah, go for it. For us, yeah, basically that was the situation for us. So before 2020, we probably about 95% of our income of our sales were to cafes and restaurants, and a few shops, all within about 10 miles of here. We're in a really touristy area, so it made sense for us just to focus on that from the beginning, focus on those restaurants, and yeah, also that kind of related to our scale, just the 2.5 acres, and actually we only really cultivate maybe it's about 1.25 to 1.5 acres in the market garden, because some of it's just really, really wet, and never really, yeah, is no good for growing on, basically. So yeah, very small scale, made sense to focus on those high value crops, to remain profitable. Salad was kind of the obvious one for us. It's an obvious one. Yeah, I think everyone knows the reasons, really, but it was, especially with all the restaurants and cafes around here, it's kind of like it's an easy one to show the difference between small scale growers and what restaurants can get otherwise from wholesalers and stuff. So it's a sort of easy way into some of the restaurants and cafes around here. And obviously it's fairly labor intensive, but that kind of sort of suited us in that we wanted to, we were kind of okay with that, and we were keen on building, on having as many people working here as we could, and sort of building a big team. But obviously that is also a problem. I'll come to that a little bit later, but obviously the cost of wages in all of this. So yeah, over the years we've just kind of added tunnels onto that original twin span tunnel. That was our kind of, I suppose, our scaling up from in the early days. And yeah, the focus really up until 2020 was kind of intensifying the market garden, focusing on that high value produce, and especially focusing on the particularly busy times of year, in terms of tourism around here, so school holidays, and bank holidays and things. And this also kind of fed into the fact that we're on very heavy soil, and so originally when we came here we kind of grew a bit of everything, and very quickly learned that it wasn't great for winter veg. Yeah, it just lies very wet all winter. But yeah, that was kind of not so much a problem for us, because the restaurants and cafes were all fairly quiet in the winter as well. This all kind of changed, yeah. So when the first lockdown happened in March 2020. We lost basically all of our customers, as all the restaurants and cafes closed. So we set up a box scheme, which I said we were never ever going to do. This is something my parents did it for I don't know how many years, a while anyway, and it was yeah, well, it was in the days where there wasn't software for dealing with all the admin, so it was, yeah, for me it just seemed like an absolute nightmare. Anyway, we were kind of like forced into making a decision on what to do, and that seemed the most obvious thing. So within 3 days of, like, I put a couple of Facebook ads out on local groups, and we had 150 customers, and we sort of had to deal with that. And obviously we had quite a lot of produce of our own, but this was March, so it was only really, yeah, actually it was only really salad then. So we bought in from other producers in Devon, other organic producers. So it was mainly South Devon organic producers through Riverford, and then Shillingford and Bishop's Farm, all larger scale organic growers, relatively close to here. We kind of chose delivery routes that followed where we sold to restaurants as well, and so that all kind of would fit in when they opened up again. And so that's kind of the situation we're in now. Is it's I think roughly about 60% of our turnover is through restaurants, cafes and shops, and about 40% is through the box scheme. And after running the box scheme for the first couple of years, it was obvious that we had a market for produce. We were still buying in through the autumn, kind of from about November onwards through until sometime usually in May, when we get early stuff from the tunnels. And it kind of, yeah, we just felt like we might as well try and grow a bit more of our own in that time. So that was where we chatted to our landlord and agreed to take on another field. So you can see the tunnels in the background there from the market garden, and then this is a kind of adjoining field just over a stream. It's another 2.5 acres. And yeah, we decided just to go for that. And then we were fortunate enough, actually. This was in 22. No, yeah. Was it 2022? Yeah, it was 2022. And we got some grant funding for like a business grant. It was kind of a post-COVID business grant, which allowed us to pay for like deer fencing and a few bits and pieces associated with the field production. So we got like a flail mower for the tractor, and a springtime thing with a crumbler roller on the back, a roller for the beds. That was, and also paid for getting water from the market garden, so the piping and the irrigation as well. So yeah, we decided to do this. It was only like 300 quid a year to rent this field, so it kind of seemed, it was risk-free. It felt pretty risk-free, basically. We thought quite a bit about how to go about this. Basically the idea was like, okay, we're going to grow lower value crops in a sort of field scale, in a kind of field scale way, but as we very quickly learned that, like, it's fairly sloped, the field, the size of it was still quite small, and the shape of it didn't really lend itself to long beds. So it was like we were in this situation where we were trying to grow lower value crops in a field scale way, but not with the mechanization associated with field scale. So yeah, it was kind of like somewhere, but we were cultivating by tractor basically, but everything else was done by hand. Also, yeah, so we just started up. You can just see this bit that was ploughed in that first year in 22. That was a fairly dry summer, and I think it gave us a bit of a false impression of what the field was like. We grew some quite nice crops up the top, and it all seemed fairly good. So we expanded. This was actually the no, this is the second year. I think we expanded it more, cultivated more ground. And basically by the end of that season, 2023, we sort of realized we'd taken on too much too quickly, without the kind of mechanization needed, for the reasons I kind of mentioned before. It's just like still short. So the beds here are 30 meters long. We could have gone down the slope, but didn't really want to do that, for mainly for like reasons of erosion, really, thinking about that. And yeah, so we got to the end of 23. I think it was, rainfall was loads higher as well than 22. I think it was like I can't remember, maybe like a third to more again. And then 24 was again higher still, I think, than 22. So basically it's taken us a couple of years to sort of understand the soil type and drainage through the field. And that's I kind of wanted to point that out as a big factor in when considering scaling up, and something that is really, we should have done before we took the field on. We should have thought more about this and kind of tried to deal with some of the drainage issues earlier, rather than like going into it very quickly, expanding into it quickly. All these things that are kind of easy to say with hindsight. So context, just wanted to talk about context. So I think this is just a really important thing. That's sometimes it can be easy to like read books, read veg growing books, or watch YouTube videos and stuff, and come up with a business plan that basically isn't appropriate for your particular context, whether that's the soil type or the market. Basically, and what suits you in terms of coming up with the systems that are most appropriate for your situation. You might it's that only for us, that's come with like basically doing it for a few years, and understanding what feels right for us, and understanding the soil basically better over the years. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we've gone about our kind of growing systems in the market garden over the years, and where we're at now with that, and how that's changed and why, basically, and some of the problems that we came across through that, and how that's relevant to the scaling up as well. So we started out at Trill. You can just see the back end of the Massey 135, a 1970s 135, the 6-foot power harrow on the back as well. And there was like a few other little bits, just like link box and roller and that sort of stuff. We used to get someone to come in and plough every spring. So it was all based basically around that. You can see, some of it's been ploughed up there. And then we would use the power harrow to create the tilth form the beds, basically. To be honest, we didn't really think about it that much. It was like, this is what kit we've got. Let's just do what we can with that. But quite quickly, we came to realize that, yeah, our soil wasn't very forgiving, basically. And particularly, yeah, with early cultivations. So we went through various techniques on trying to like get around some of the drainage problems that we were seeing in the market garden. So over the years, we started trying to raise the beds with a friend up the road who had a bed former. You can see on the beds on the left there, to try and basically raise them up a little bit. That was kind of seemed great at the time, but very sort of foolish looking back at it. It was a pretty heavy machine, and on our soil, even if it was just a little bit too wet, the discs that would pull the soil in from the paths would end up smearing it. And it's this smearing on our heavy clay soil that has caused a lot of problems we've found over the years, with the cultivations and the ploughing. And because we're trying to get on, basically we've done it a little bit too early over the years, trying to get on the ground a little bit too early for some of those earlier crops, and it hasn't dried out enough. And then you're creating big issues with the cultivations. So yeah, after trying with bed forming, we went to a bit more like, we were still using the power harrow on the back of the tractor, but we went to flat beds. We were using quite a lot of compost, as you can see, on some of the beds as well, in the hope that that would help. Then we started using the two-wheel tractor. These are beds formed with the two-wheel tractor with the rotary plough on the BCS 740 two-wheel tractor. So basically using lighter machinery, but still quite a lot of cultivation, or a lot of kind of soil movement, and going back to these raised beds. Yeah, and then basically be getting this smearing in the pathways when we were using that. And the pathways are one of those things that's like, you can either think of them as just a way of getting to and from, or like around the beds, or like it, and if thinking of them like that can be, they can then become kind of like difficult to manage. Or you can think of them as almost part of the growing space as well. Obviously the vegetables roots don't just stop at the edge of the bed, so the paths are really important, I think. And yeah, we were finding often the edges of the beds, the growth on the edge rows was not great often, so we stopped using that. So then we were just using a power harrow on the two-wheel tractor, and then we've kind of like gradually used that less and less over the years, and then also like less compost and focusing much more on green manures, undersowings, especially in the autumn and winter. And then using, you can just see at the bottom of the picture here, the two-wheel tractor's got the flail mower on. So yeah, basically using that and silage tarps to kill off weeds and old crops. And yeah, this has basically this approach for us on our soil has led to much more much improved drainage, and yeah, much healthier crops. Obviously it's very labor intensive, well, much more so than just using the tractor, but yeah, I'll come back to that in a minute. But yeah, basically we've moved away from using the tractor at all in the market garden. We're just using the 2-wheel tractor and not cultivating, not even using the power harrow. Maybe a quarter of the beds will get cultivated every year, and that's usually just in the summer when it's a bit drier. Yeah, so we're yeah, for us, the drainage is the big issue on our site. We're on grade 3B land, which I read. I looked up the kind of definition for this the other day, and it said something like moderate for pasture, which kind of, I mean, I'm sure like there's loads of you watching this as well that are on similar soils as well. It's just yeah, basically it's not ideal for growing veg on. But for us, it's the drainage really that's the big problem. So yeah, the results in changing our systems in the market garden have been well, the improvements have been massive. But then transferring this to growing more lower value crops isn't so feasible because of that. Yeah, the relatively high labor inputs required for this compared to more mechanized approach. Right, just seeing how many pages I've got and how much time I've got. I'm gonna have to speed up my chatting, I think. So in the field, yeah, as I said before, it kind of made sense for us in that we knew we had a guaranteed market for to sell more autumn and winter stuff. So in terms of that, it made sense to try giving it a go with the scaling up into the new field. There was kind of relatively little risk associated with it. It would be generally, most of it would be lower value produce. So ideally using less labor. However, yeah, again, the kind of constraints set by the size and shape of the field didn't really allow us to, and the poor drainage in there as well, didn't really allow us to mechanize as much as we'd hoped. So, oh yeah, this is going back to the market garden here. Just that was just a picture of, just to give you an example of the drainage. Because that was when we were cultivating a bit more. We very well haven't seen it like this, even with all the downpours. There is a bit of water sitting in the market garden for a few hours, but it doesn't sit there for long anymore. So yeah, that also gives an example of why we basically chose to steer clear from the winter veg in the market garden when we were only growing in there. But yeah, the kind of change in our business when we started Box Scheme just made us rethink things a little bit, and thought we'd give it a go in the new field. This is a picture of the new field, which is this is the kind of picture that, yeah, makes me do a little sick in my mouth when I see it, because it's this is just basically an example of poor soil management. And it's easy to beat ourselves up about these sorts of things, but yeah, basically this can't remember, this must have been end of 2022, yeah, end of the first year. Yeah, we knew it wasn't going to be great, the drainage in the field, and that it might be difficult to get on it early in the spring, but we also did, most of the crops we were growing in there would be slightly later planted. So still in the market garden, we do all of our earlier plantings, and then here most of them would be later, more into sort of May, June, July. But then there's a few, yeah, I mean the shallots, I guess, are the earliest ones that we would be trying to plant in the field. And we had big problems with that last spring. So yeah, so I kind of mentioned it earlier. I think a regret is that we went into the field without really paying enough attention to the drainage. And then once you start cultivating and planting, it's really difficult to do that, to work on the drainage once there's crops in the ground, basically. We're now in a situation where we're kind of scaling back on the field again, partly to try and do some of that drainage works in there. Yeah, and kind of like reevaluate it, I suppose. So yeah, although it made sense for us to scale up production in business terms, in our context, in this field, it didn't suit mechanized sort of field scale production. And so we're in a situation now where we've got the market garden, which kind of works really well, or relatively well, in terms of the systems that we use and the crops that we grow. And then there's the field where we're trying to work out these different techniques to overcome some of these problems involved in like growing the lower value crops without much mechanization and on very heavy soil. We're actually thinking, yeah, and so doing it somewhere between this kind of like field scale and hand scale. We're going to be, we've got quite a lot of cooch in this field as well. We're going to be, we're looking into using a bit of MyPex on selective crops this year, especially, well, the shallots is one of them, which will hopefully save a lot of labor on weeding, and yes, hopefully keep some of those weeds under control a little bit more, especially in these early years, without the mechanized weeding that we haven't got. Those are shallots in, that was 2023. Those are basically shallots after harvest, and then the paths are all sown with like diverse green manure mix as well. I'm going to just flip through these. We've got we move one of our tunnels every year, so this is just a picture of that being moved, going back to the market garden here. But obviously polytunnels are like a massive part of our market garden growing systems in terms of making it feasible. And then, yeah, just wanted to mention the kind of actually, I'll come to that in a minute. So in terms of economics of scaling up, basically it hasn't worked for us for the reasons I've given. I'll just go to this one. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail here, but this is the whole. I've only gone back to 2017 here, but you can see like a big leap in turnover in 2020. Basically, COVID. We had the box scheme. Although restaurants and cafes closed, they kind of came back later on in the year. So that was a big turnover year. Expenses went up quite a lot, and but turnover went up, yeah, enough to allow for that. And then there's a huge leap if you look at the wages, basically from after that, like 2021 to 22 and onwards. Yeah, the wages are the massive cost for us. We kind of, that 2021 we went into, that was the first year 22 was the first year we had the field, wasn't it? So yeah, that was the increase in labor there associated with that. We kind of knew it was going to be quite labor intensive, so we just took on more labor. I didn't want the stress, and also because 2020 we were so run ragged, we couldn't carry on like that, basically. I'm just gonna go back. Sorry, let me just catch up with where I'm at here. Okay, I'm just going to flick through here and actually just go to this end bit because I think this is important. I've already done my 30 minutes. Sorry, Addy. This is the bit that I wanted just to talk a little bit about, the kind of personal preferences and business values and ideals and stuff like that. One thing I'd say is there's a lot to be said for like trying to know a little bit about everything when growing veg, and we kind of have to know all sorts, whether that's like a bit of mechanics, plumbing, sales, marketing, all that kind of stuff, not to mention the actual growing the veg itself as well. But I also think it's okay to get help for some of these things and accept that you might not be suited to some of it. Everyone's minds work differently, and whilst it's good to have this sort of general understanding of it all, it's also okay to accept that some of us aren't particularly suited to certain parts of the veg growing. And I think that's also can be the case for scaling up into more field scale operations. It's a different skill altogether, and one that just doesn't suit some people. So it's about getting this balance between kind of specialization and having this overall understanding as well. We've kind of come to realize that where our skills lie, and what we enjoy probably most is trying to get the most out of the market garden, the sort of small areas as we can. But I totally understand that not everyone, we can't all do this, and we need people growing more field scale stuff as well. That's the tricky thing about it. Also for us, we kind of enjoy the varied work that this market garden brings, the diversity there, and bringing other things to it. Like we do all our own propagation, the seed growing that we do, running courses, having flowers growing in there as well. That's all basically really important to us, and is more of a focus than the producing as much as we can. That's kind of what I've realized. Also enjoyed the challenge of working out working out the best systems for the market garden. This is a crazy tunnel one summer, which that was just later on in the day that we flailed down. So working out what systems work best but still trying to keep this like productive garden, but really really diverse as well, and biodiverse. And changing our mindsets on things like soil health and weeds and tidiness. For me, the most difficult part of like the growing is actually the sort of the business side of it, and managing a business and a team. The managing of the business is just it doesn't really give me that much joy. It more just takes up a lot of headspace and adds quite a lot of stress to it. But that's another thing as well about the expanding or scaling up, is sometimes that headspace is like, I think I'm in a time of my life where I've got a couple of kids, and I'm not really up for like learning these new skills. Maybe I'll come to a point where I find a slightly better drained bit of land when the kids are older, and I'll be up for doing more field scale production. But basically for me right now, I think I've realized it's kind of not the thing, and I think that's just a really important thing to be aware of. Just flick through these. I'm not going to dwell on this, but we wrote a mission statement a few years ago, and it's quite a handy thing just to like look back on every now and again, to sort of like reevaluate and check in with like changes that we make to the business and stuff. And this, I've put this in there, in obviously in relation to the scaling up stuff. Right, that's yeah, that's basically it. Last little tiny little summary, I think, is just to say that yeah, obviously like market gardening is really challenging and demanding, requires a lot of hard work for where usually very little financial gain, and we often have to make do with the opportunities that we have. It can also be really challenging mentally, and the pressures of making it work as a business, and kind of compound that feeling as well. And having said that, I'm totally aware of how lucky we are to be able to rent that trail, and that we were given that opportunity, and the yeah, the kind of the massive benefits to the work that are kind of unquantifiable, but we still have to try and find ways to make it work as a business. And yeah, I guess that was the reason we tried scaling up, and I think for some people with certain contexts, that's like a really I mean, Adi and Rita show that really well. A great example of that, and like hugely inspiring. But yeah, for us, I think it's not the answer, but also don't have any regrets like giving that a go. And we'll like carry on trying to sort of work out systems that suit our field as well. Yeah, and I think it's just important to say that it will be different for everyone, and you have to find a way that works for you personally, with your context and with your ideals, and as well as like your physical and mental capabilities as well. Yeah, I think that's the kind of conclusion to my little talk. Hopefully, yeah, not quite as technical as Adi's, but hopefully gave you a bit more of a story of our scaling up and maybe why it hasn't worked. Yeah, sorry, I've overrun. How do I stop share? Okay.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was brilliant, and really yeah, really amazing to have both of those perspectives, I think. There is one question in the chat, if you wanted to check that one out, if you can see it, or do you want me to read it out?